The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with the NIDA Discovery, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. Mini celebration time here at Cannabis Conversation Towers. It's our 150th episode. This show, as ever, is sponsored by our good friends at Lumino. Lumino are a boutique HR and recruitment agency for the European cannabis industry. Our guest this week is the legendary Professor Raphael Mechoulam. He is one of the world's greatest researchers into cannabinoid chemistry, and Lumino have helped several businesses with their science and medical staffing needs. They have a great understanding of some of the technical needs of companies in this space and have placed several chief medical and chief scientific officers as well as analytical chemists into medical cannabis companies. So, as always, if you need help with HR or recruitment, please do get in touch with them at luminorecruit.com and tell them that I sent you. But as mentioned, it is our 150th episode. I'm beyond honoured to welcome back Professor Mechoulam again as our guest. He has had such a huge impact on our understanding of the plant and paved way for lots more research to come. He's into his 90s now, which is incredible, and is still working hard on discovering more, which is a true inspiration for us all. On a personal note, I'm really chuffed to be still doing this 3 years on, and crucially, I'm still really enjoying myself. It's a great privilege for me to be able to speak to legends like Professor Mechoulam, as well as many of the guests I featured along the way. I've mentioned a few times recently my frustration at the pace of change around cannabis and the development of the industry, but I'm still very committed to growing a well-informed sector and giving a platform to the thought leaders and professionals in this space. I do think education is needed all round and continual education at that, as well as in wider society too. So that's a key driver for me, and that inspires me to keep putting this show out week after week. From a personal development perspective, I've grown huge amounts through this podcast, and it's something I'm incredibly proud of. I've learned so much about this incredible plant from so many angles and realised just how much there is still to learn. And that will go on for many years, I'm sure. I've developed an incredible global network as well and picked up some good friends along the way too. I wasn't sure which way I'd go when I was looking for a career change away from being a lawyer. I still practice law and have some great clients like Columbia Care, but I also realised that I really like working with entrepreneurs and helping early stage businesses. I love hearing about the challenges that they face and thinking of innovative ways to deal with them. And as you well know, there are plenty of challenges in the cannabis industry. But I'm very pleased to be channeling this all into my consultancy biz, Canverse. As ever, we'd love to chat to you if you need help in this space, so please do drop me a line on LinkedIn or by email. But now, I will simply let the great man do the talking. Enjoy. On today's show, I'm very honoured to welcome back Professor Raphael Mechoulam. Professor Mechoulam is known as the Godfather of Cannabis Research. He's done a huge amount of work in this area. Amongst his many achievements, he was the first to isolate THC, first to discover the structure of CBD, and the first to isolate the endocannabinoids anandamide and 2-AG. His main role is as Professor of Medicinal Chemistry at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Professor Mechoulam, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No, real pleasure. How are you today?
Fine. We have a storm, but nothing major. We'll survive.
That's good.
There is, of course, a problem with the disease, both in the UK and here. Well, I hope that things will be okay. Not simple.
Not simple at all. But yes, I too hope that everything will be okay. So you were on the show quite a while ago, actually, and I think you celebrated your 90th birthday. So congratulations on that. What is it that keeps you sort of driving to do more research in this area?
Well, I'm used to have been doing research since 1955. This is the one thing I do. Of course, I was head of my university many years ago, and I had to decide then whether I want to proceed being a president of the university or go back to research. Both things at the same time are not so simple. So I decided to go back to research. And we've been working on the chemistry and pharmacology and here and there clinical problems with natural products. Cannabis is the main project. Initially, we worked on the chemistry. I was surprised to find out that while the chemistry of morphine, cocaine were well known, the chemistry of cannabis, when we started in the early 60s, was not well known. I was very surprised. THC had been isolated but not in pure form. The structure was partially known, but not fully known. The same was true for essentially all the other compounds. And so I thought that's something that has to be done. And as I'm a chemist working on natural products, I took up the problem. And then, as you just said, 1963, my first paper together with my colleague was on the structure of cannabidiol, CBD. Again, strangely, it was not known, although the compound itself had been isolated both in the UK and in the US a decade previously. Then we went to THC, again, preparation in pure form, elucidation of the structure. Then we looked at new compounds, like we isolated the compound, which we named cannabigerol, and a compound cannabichromine, and quite a few others, and we worked on their chemistry. Then when we knew, and that took quite a few years, we went into metabolism, worked on that, went into pharmacology, and so more or less the chemistry was well known by the time we finished. Other groups joined the research, and the one thing that was not known was the mechanism. It was thought at the beginning that the mechanism is not a well-defined one. Well, it turned out that it is very well-defined. A group in the US found a receptor, and now receptors don't exist in our brain, and it was found in the brain of an animal. Maybe it was a pig, maybe not. Anyway, it was found in the brain of an animal, and receptors don't exist because there is a plant out there. Otherwise, we'll have millions of receptors. So we went ahead looking for the compounds in our body, endogenous compounds, and after quite a long time, we found two of them, and they are chemically completely different from the compounds in the plant. We isolated very, very small amounts in the body, and we were lucky to be able to elucidate the structure with those very small amounts. And one of them turned out to be ethanolamine of arachidonic acid. We called it anandamide. In Sanskrit, ananda is happiness, and we thought that the compound has something to do with emotions, and it does. And the second compound, which turned out to be arachidonic acid glycerol and ester. So that's the second compound, 2AG. Later, we found a few more, but they seem to be minor. One of them is an ether, surprisingly, and it's not present in all animals. As a matter of fact, some Japanese couldn't find it in their work, but other people reproduced our work. So there we have an ether in addition to the ester and amide. So there has been a huge amount of work on these two compounds because they represent the basis, the chemical basis of a new biochemical system, very widely used in the body. Our paper on anandamide has been cited some 6,000 times, and the paper on the ester of 2AG, something like 3,000 times. So they're very, very, people are very much interested in what these compounds do. And now we thought that if the body knows how to make anandamide, anandamide is formed from an acid, fatty acid found in the body, an amino acid found in the body, and they get together. There's a little bit, there are some reactions that are going on, but that's what we need, a fatty acid and an amino acid. Now, our body has a lot of fatty acids and a lot of amino acids, and using the same mechanism, it makes a lot of other compounds. A US group found something like 25 or 30 compounds of this type. Now, our body doesn't make them because it has nothing else to do. It makes them because apparently it needs them. So we went ahead looking for what the hell do these compounds do? And we found, for example, that one of these compounds lowers the amount of damage that one can get by hitting one's head, brain trauma damage. Another compound, and there we spent a huge amount of time working on that, we found that it has to do with formation of bones. The compound is found both in the bone and in the brain. And again, it's a fatty acid bound an amino acid, and it doesn't bind to the receptors of the cannabinoids, but chemically, it's closely related. Fatty acid bound an amino acid, and it has to do with formation of bones. And over the last 3 or 4 years, in collaboration with a Canadian group, a UK group, Italian group, and a US group, we found that another compound, a fatty acid bound an amino acid, has to do with addiction, nicotine addiction, tries to lower nicotine addiction, and it also tries to lower the withdrawal symptoms of opiate addiction, nicotine addiction, and so on. Now, here I want to stress, we work always with collaborators depending on the theme. My group is essentially a chemical one, but in the case of addiction, for example, we work with Professor Linda Power in Canada, and she did most of the biological work, outstanding biological work. An Italian group, Italian-Canadian group, Enzo Di Maso, found the actual compound. We synthesized it. And so in this area of natural products, and I work in the cannabinoids, but there are others as well. If one wants to have significant results, collaboration is essential because, well, I understand what they're doing, but I don't know the techniques. They understand what I'm doing, but again, most probably they don't know the techniques that I use. So it's a collaboration which is of extreme importance, and that's what we've been doing over the last, several decades.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, there's so much there. And the last time you were on, we talked a lot about the historic research you've done. And today, maybe we'll talk about the current research you're doing in terms of the cannabinoid acids. But just to finish off that first part, how difficult has it been to research because of the illegal status of cannabis? Has that complicated things?
Well, I have to say thanks to the administration. So when I started work, well back in the early 60s, I went to the administrative head of my institute. At that time, I was at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Rehovot, and asked him, do you know somebody in the police who can give me cannabis for research? He picked the phone and called somebody, number 2 or number 3 in the police, and said, we have a researcher who wants to work on cannabis. Can you give it to him? And I hear from the other side, somebody shouting, is he reliable? Am I reliable? And of course, the administrative head of the institute didn't have the foggiest idea whether I'm reliable. For all he knew, I might be taking it and smoking it at home. He said, yes, of course he's reliable. So I went there to the police. They gave me 5 kilos of hashish. We drank a cup of coffee, and I took it on the bus. I didn't have a car then, and took it to the institute. And people were just, what a kind smell in the bus. They didn't know that. And I never had any problems with administration. As a matter of fact, I had broken the law. I had to get an okay from the Ministry of Health that are in charge of these things. But it so happened that I know the people at the Ministry of Health, and they say, this is the last time you do it. Next time you do it through us. So when I needed more, I went there. I drank coffee with the people at the Ministry of Health. They gave me a note to the police. You're allowed to give him. I went to the police. It took another couple of kilos. Never had any problems. In many other countries, I've heard that there are lots of problems. And probably it's not so simple because we are a university. Students come in the lab, they get out of the lab, they stay for a few months, then other come in. I can't stand next to each student all the time whether he uses it for research or not. We never had any problem. I don't believe that any student of mine or any collaborator of mine did anything that was illegal. So we were lucky to be able to work as if these compounds bought from one of the commercial companies.
That's great. I mean, I suppose that's probably one of the reasons why Israel is one of the leaders in this field of research, because more kind of accepting environment. But yeah, that's great. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about your current research now around cannabinoid acids. Would you mind just sort of introducing what is your main focus of research at the moment?
Well, as I said, my research has been 4 types of research. One of the chemistry of the plant cannabinoids, the second, the endogenous cannabinoids. The third was the compounds that are chemically related to the endogenous cannabinoids. And the fourth one is using the plant cannabinoids and as well as the endogenous cannabinoids to prepare compounds which hopefully may become drugs. We know that the cannabinoids have a very potent activity in many areas. They were not used widely because of the psychoactivity of THC, but CBD has no psychoactivity. And we know today there are 2 receptors. The CB1 receptor, when activated, causes the psychoactivity. The CB2 receptor is essentially one that does not cause any psychoactivity, but has all kinds of potentially therapeutic effects. So we went ahead trying to synthesize compounds that are specific for the CB2 receptor that do not, and yes, we had compound called 308 and so on. We had problems getting companies interested because companies, when they hear cannabis, immediately say, well, we'll have problems, administrative problems, didn't want to work on them. But now things have changed. And one of the companies is supporting our work on cannabinoid acids, and we have published a few papers on that. You see, the plant does not synthesize CBD or THC. The plant synthesizes their precursor acids. And these acids had not been evaluated thoroughly because they are not stable, and a drug has to be stable. Well, we stabilized these acids by making a methyl ester, and we found that these methyl esters are valuable compounds. They really can be used. They're strong against pain, so on. So we're working with one company on derivatives of these acids. With another company, we took cannabidiol and put a fluorine on the molecule, and that was published. And yes, the compound became more active, namely we could use lower amounts of the material, and I hope that they're going ahead with this derivative. And so we work with a few companies, derivatives of cannabinoids, and hopefully 1 or 2 of them will reach the actual drug stage.
Yes.
Making a drug is a complicated matter. It's not just that it's a new compound, has activity, but it shouldn't do anything else. It should not be toxic. Of course, these compounds are not toxic, but you never know whether they don't cause any changes, they don't have any effects which are not desirable, and so on. It takes a long time and a lot of money to develop a drug.
Can I just ask, Professor Mechoulam, when you're talking about them being unstable, does that mean that they are likely to change into other chemicals, and making them an ester sort of keeps them consistent?
I'm speaking of the acids alone. The other compounds are stable, more or less. THC and oxidation can convert into cannabinol, and one buys cannabis, one finds not only THC but also cannabinol, which is an oxidation product of THC. But basically, the unstable compounds are the acids. They decarboxylate and they convert CBD acid into CBD, THC acid into THC. Now, if somebody writes on a bottle, we have whatever concentration of the acid, well, that doesn't mean much because by the time the person uses it, chances are that part of it has converted. And pharmaceutical firms, rightly so, cannot use unstable products.
Yeah.
But the methyl ester is much more stable, and that's why we work on the methyl ester, a simple derivative of the acids.
Fantastic. And I suppose it keeps the same properties.
Well,
It
so
changes.
far, we have seen that it has the same properties. It's a very small, simple change.
Yeah. Am I right in thinking that the precursor to those is CBGA?
Well, yes, the same. The same is true for CBG. It does not exist as such. It exists at the CBGA. Now, we discovered CBG acid way, way back in 1965, probably, or maybe even earlier. And we published that. Now, this compound, this acid, CBGA acid, is the precursor, apparently, of all the cannabinoids. The body or the plant takes a precursor of one part of the molecule, precursor of the other part of the molecule, puts them together, and the first compound is CBG acid. And this compound, by various changes in the plant, makes apparently all the other compounds, 1, 2, 3 steps. And so it's an extremely important compound biochemically. It does not exist in large amounts. It's basically a very minor compound as such, but it has a major importance in metabolism.
Yeah, there's loads there as well, isn't there? I mean, so when you're talking about the precursors and you're talking about, let's say, CBDA and THCA, how do they compare to the decarboxylated version, so CBD and THC?
Well, THC acid is not psychoactive, contrary to the activity of THC. But on the other hand, CBD acid and CBD have a few common properties. Both are active in pain, both are active in anxiety, both lower nausea due to various other effects. So they seem to be closely related in the CBD series, not in the THC series.
Right, very interesting. And did you mention something around potency as well?
Yes, we can potentiate the effect. You see, CBD is a very interesting compound. It acts on a long list of things that are of major importance in therapeutics. It works on anxiety, on pain, on depression, on schizophrenia, inflammations, very, very active. But at times it needs very large doses. For example, in schizophrenia, and we don't work on schizophrenia, but it has been published by a German author, Leveke, that the doses needed are nearly 1 gram. Now that's a pretty high dose for a drug. If one has to take 2 or 3 a day, that's 2 or 3 grams. That's a very, very large amount. And we found that not in schizophrenia, we haven't worked on schizophrenia, we found that we can lower the amount by making derivatives. And the fluorine compound, for example, is very close to cannabidiol, but the doses needed are lower. And the same is true for some of the other derivatives. So chances are that having a new compound, we can use lower amounts.
Right, fantastic. So I suppose that works very well on the CBD side, and that's a key benefit around the THC part is the lack of psychoactivity.
Well, the THC has psychoactivity, and the derivatives, many of the derivatives have psychoactivity, not the acid, but many of them do have activity. And these activities are, people use cannabis for recreational purposes because of the THC activity, but it is, of course, not really of medical use. So we have medicinal use, we have recreational use. In medicinal use, the THC is a minor compound. THC actually is an approved drug at the moment, but it's not widely used because of the psychoactivity. But CBD is an approved drug for certain types of epilepsy in children, and it is used, and I believe that to be used even wider for other things. But at the moment, it has been approved for epilepsy.
Yes, and very kind of widely talked about a use for CBD.
Yeah.
So just on a kind of chemical level, when you're making the acids into an ester in order to stabilize them, is this plant-based source material that you're then using to convert, or is it other types of synthetic processes?
Both. I mean, it depends on the price and the time needed. After all, if we get cannabis, hashish, from the police, we have to invest time in separating and purifying compounds. And ultimately, that costs money. If these compounds are commercially available, frequently they are less expensive if we take into account the time than doing it in the lab. So we use the starting materials, commercial material. CBD we bought from Germany. And although it's not inexpensive, it still costs less than making it out of cannabis. Yeah. Originally, we worked with the plant materials alone. We have no problem. We know how to separate the materials. We have published detailed ways of doing it. So we can always go back and do it. But if we can buy it, sometimes it's less expensive.
Yeah. And this is a slightly strange question, but there's a lot of people who get not worried, but they find the word synthetic like a little bit controversial versus the natural. What do you sort of think about this?
Well, it has no scientific basis. If A is equal to A, then it is equal in all respects. Whether you get cannabidiol, pure cannabidiol from the plant, or you buy pure synthetic compounds. And these are crystalline compounds, have a melting point, they have all kinds of physical properties. They are completely identical. This is the basis of chemistry. In chemistry, you don't have a natural product is different from the same synthetic product. That for a chemist doesn't make sense. Either a compound is identical or it is not identical, period.
Yeah, that makes sense. And are you looking at these things in isolation in terms of how they treat conditions, or will you be looking at them in a kind of broad spectrum way in terms of working with other cannabinoids as well?
Well, it depends. It seems, it has not been proven, but it seems that cannabidiol with a little bit of THC is better as an anti-epileptic than pure CBD, but this has to be proven. It seems to be so, but no, we need better scientific basis. Many years ago, we found that some of the activity of cannabis, of THC, although it's due to THC, is improved by having quite a few of the other compounds. We call this entourage. That's the French name. Actually, it's also an English name. It's the entourage reaction. And the entourage has been quoted many times, but there isn't enough scientific work to show when and where entourage works. It doesn't work for all activities. It works for certain activities. And many people that have to use cannabis, medical cannabis, say that the total extract is better than the purified compounds, which seems to be correct.
Yeah. But as with everything, we need more research and data in this area. So
unfortunately, yes. And we know that this seems to be correct because some of the terpenes are needed there, although they are not active by themselves, at least not all of them, but they seem to change a little bit the activity of the active compound. You know, this is different from synergism, which in chemistry means two active compounds acting together are better. 1 and 1 is not 2, but 3. In this, with entourage, we take something that is not active and it changes a bit the activity. But it's not true for all activities. Only turns out that it's true for some activities. And some of the terpenes have now been shown that have activities of their own. Yeah, one of these compounds, one of the terpene is active on the CB2 receptor. Namely, it does not cause psychoactivity, but it has quite a lot of other very promising activities and so on. A compound that has been known probably for, who knows, maybe 60, 70 years.
Wow.
Not the cannabinoid, the terpene.
It gets so complicated, doesn't it? So to go back to the acids, just before we kind of get towards the end of the show, What stage of development are you guys at the moment? Are you still in the research phase, or are any of these compounds entered into clinical trials?
Well, I work with several companies, namely, we prepare derivatives and give it to the companies, they test them, and I hope that they will go into the clinical trials. I'm not involved as a principal investigator in clinical trials. They may ask my opinion and they may ask what I know about it, but I'm not doing the clinical trials. But this is something that's extremely expensive and it has to be organized by a company. In order to develop a drug today, one needs $1 billion or something like that, which is, of course, ridiculous for a university person even to talk about. So that's where we are. Now, this is as regards the new compounds, and we are also looking at what's happening with the endogenous cannabinoids in the body, and we hope to see additional activities or playing around with one activity versus another activity. It turns out that the CB1 receptor is the receptor found at highest levels in the brain compared to other activity, to other receptors well known for 30, 40 years, dopamine receptor and others. So they are of major importance in a huge variety of effects in the body, and they are actually of great interest in many pathological situations where you see changes in the concentrations of 2-AG. We have seen in some pathological conditions, 2-AG goes up. Why does it go up? Well, maybe the body sees that 2-AG is a compound that prevents or lowers the disease. I worked with Professor Esti Shohami. She's a specialist in brain damage. And I mentioned that, but in a little bit more details, we saw that on brain damage, the amount of 2-AG goes up. Now, does it go up because the brain has been damaged and doesn't know what it does? Or is it that it synthesizes 2-AG as a opposing factor to the brain damage? So we gave animals, mice, that had undergone rather slight brain damage, and we gave 2-AG, and we compared them with animals that had the same amount of damage but didn't get 2-AG. And we found that those animals that we had given them 2-AG had much less damage than the others. So here we have something that the body does in order to lower the damage. It's kind of a parallel system to the immune system. When our body is attacked by bacteria, viruses, and so on, immediately the immune system goes and works against them. Here we have the same in areas where the immune system doesn't seem to be involved, like brain damage.
Yeah. So almost like it compensates a bit to trying to deal with that trauma.
The immune system is an important system, but it does not cover everything. So the body has the endocannabinoid system that works against others. Most probably there are other systems as well.
Yeah, lots to contend with there. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information on the work that you're doing. And just to sort of finish off the interview, are there any other areas of research from around the world that you're very excited about in this area that you're seeing?
Well, we did quite a lot of work on a plant that was widely used a few years ago, 2,000 years ago. Not 2,000 is not so far away. And that particular plant grows in Abyssinia, mostly. Today we know that it can be grown elsewhere as well. But at that time, they used to take it from Abyssinia to all the countries in the Middle East. And it was part of the religious observations of religions at that time. 2,000 years ago, there were quite a few religions around, not as today, just 2 or 3, but many more. And it was used. And I can send you a list of what this compound was being used. And it was extremely precious. And actually, there were wars fought over the routes for this compound. And so we looked at it, and yes, it has psychoactivity. We worked on the compounds that were involved, and some of them are known, some of them are not. And today it's not being used, not of great interest. But a few years ago, 2,000 years ago, people were being killed because of this plant. So I can send it to you. We're not working at the moment because the fellow completed his PhD in the topic, but we published 3 or 4 papers on that.
Yeah, please do. I look forward to reading that. That's very interesting.
So I'll send it to you.
Thank you. Cool. Well, I've been very lucky to get you for this long, Professor Mechoulam. Thank you for joining me.
Pleasure. It was a pleasure. And hope that people will look at cannabis research as a positive thing, because I hope that it not only brings us an additional understanding of what our body does. Those brings forth, I hope, the suggestion that research in areas like this one has to be done in collaboration between chemists, biologists, pharmacology, and so on. And I hope that people will be interested. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. No, and thank you for all that you've done for this field of research and to really open it up, and all of the work you're continuing to do. So we're all very, very grateful for that. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast. It will help me spread the good word on how this amazing industry is developing. I work with various cannabis startups to help them get funded and grow. I also work with corporates and international cannabis companies to help them understand and navigate the European cannabis sector. We're working with some great clients across the cannabis value chain, and we'd love to help you too. Please visit www.canverse.global to get in touch.